Well, good evening, Minister, and everyone. It's great to be here, and I've got 10 minutes to set the scene, and I really want to pose a question when we put up a banner such as this, cooler, greener Adelaide. What do we actually mean? What do we mean by cooler, and what do we mean by greener? And I really want to explore that. I like to explore that with the notion of, or perhaps a concept of, an ecological landscapes in cities. And why I wanted to use that context is really to make the point that creating a cooler, greener Adelaide is not simply about let's go out and plant some trees. Let's go out and have more green grass areas. There has got to be a much more considered way of seizing this opportunity to transform our cities. And the concept of an ecological landscape really is now before us in the sense that, as you've heard, with urban renewal development, there is going to be a shift as cities become more dense, a shift from private space to public space, that communities will be looking to engage a lot more with public spaces. But public spaces can no longer simply be delivered on the basis of their amenity. A nice place to have a picnic, yep, that's important, place to kick a ball, but that we really now need to think about some of the functionalities of those public spaces. And that the public spaces that we now need to think about and the process of greening a city has got to include ecological functioning. They do need to provide greater function for us than simply providing us with shade, providing us with great greenery and good amenity. It is only when we realize what we need to do with our open space and green spaces can we truly call them green infrastructure. And it's only when we as government and community recognize them as infrastructure that we can actually start to think about how we would maintain it and how we could manage it as an essential asset for our cities. But I ask the first question, what makes it cooler? When we say we want a cooler Adelaide, what does it really mean? And I'll start from the most basic. And this is some work that was done by the CRC under Professor Nigel Tapper out at Monash University for quite some time now. A bunch of his PhD students were doing a lot of work over the past 5 to 7 years, asking some fundamental questions like, what will happen if we increase vegetation cover in our city? And some of the response from that was that in a typical summer, if we can convert vegetation cover from 20% in our city to 80%, we can expect a 6-degree reduction in surface temperature. Now, there are a couple of terminologies I need to get across to you. And there are 3 things about temperature that you need to be aware of. The simplest measure of what we can do to influence the cooling of our city is, of course, surface temperature. The temperature on our road, on our surface throughout that. But that really only have its effect on us in terms of our human being is actually quite different. There is a second terminology called air temperature. Now, the surface temperature influences the air temperature. It's still a very physical thing. And that's what we feel. As we walk in our city, we feel the air temperature. But there's a third measure, and that is human thermal comfort. That is actually how we physiologically respond to the different temperature. There's a lot of research being done to look at the relationship between those 3 things. If we knew what the impact of what we do in cooling our city has on surface temperature, we still need to be able to work out how that influences air temperature. And by knowing the air temperature, we then need to do another bit of research, which has now got a lot more social research coming in, how that actually affects our human thermal comfort, and that's how we feel. So with this work, there was some work done that said that if we actually start to green our city, changing it from 80% of our city, having some form of vegetation cover, we can expect 6 degrees reduction in surface temperature. Another PhD students done in 2017 actually start to ask the question, well, what does it mean in terms of air temperature? So did another study that showed that a change from 10% greening of our city to 100% greening can actually change the air temperature by 1 degree. Now, 1 degree may not seem much, but it is really significant when you actually start to look at how that influences our physiological response, the human thermal comfort. Another bit of study asked the question, what about open water bodies in our cities? And again, work done, published in 2017, showed that in air temperature, you can expect a 1 degree reduction when you actually live around open water bodies. That's why people live around open water bodies. And depending on which direction the wind blows, you can be 1 block or 2 blocks from the open water body, and you can still feel the effect of that in terms of cooling. We then asked another question, what if we irrigate our landscape? And this is really important because it's this work that shows us that if we have a little bit of light irrigation, especially in anticipation of a heat wave, we can reduce temperature during that heat wave, air temperature, by 1 degree. And similarly, if you really know what you're doing, and if you're looking at preempting really heavy heat wave conditions and really deliver heavy irrigation, really try and wet our green spaces, you can get up to 2.5 degree reduction in temperature. In Melbourne and in other places, we are now using this information to look at how we preemptively wet our green surfaces in anticipation of a heat wave to try and cool our city down. We then say, what can we do down at the micro level in our little gardens in the back? And again, if you look at that data, another piece of work shows that if you have moist gardens and you irrigate that garden prior to heat wave conditions, you can get up to 3.5 degree reduction. Now, I like to pause here and say, why is that so? It really is a very simple explanation of evaporative cooling. Especially in Adelaide, when you have dry climate, dry heat, any means of actually introducing water actually introduce an evaporative cooling effect. And it's all about energy. The sun radiant energy that comes in, if there's a way to dissipate that energy, which is a way to use up that energy, whether through evaporation or evapotranspiration, you create a cooling effect. With plants, there is this additional, plants and trees, they're like pumps. They basically continue to evapotranspire when there's good heat radiant energy, and therefore it actually creates a cooling for you. Ask the question, what about improving our streetscape? You can expect 1% again reduction in air temperature. What do you do with green roofs? Now, with green roofs, the study shows that you have up to 20 degrees reduction in temperature. But what does it mean in air temperature really does depend on how high and how low that roof is. So the jury is a little bit out in terms of how it really impacts on the air temperature in that regard. But there are other things like what does a tree do? As I say, it is a great pump for evapotranspirations and so on. So with a minute to go, there's a second question I want to ask with 2 minutes to go. So we know what we need to do to make it cooler, but what do we need to do to make it greener? And I want to put to you that green is not just the color green. The green is about the notion of our cities providing ecosystem services. How do we green our city and at the same time start to think about improving the water quality of stormwater that runs off? How do we manage stormwater as a resource simply by cleaning that stormwater in the green spaces that we are creating? How do we actually provide buffering of our natural environment from the impact of urbanization in our cities? Green infrastructure actually can deliver that, as you can see from the pictures and many of the good examples in SA, while at the same time deliver the type of cooling that you want to have. Now, what if we join those parks and gardens, join them with green corridors? We now have great passage for flood waters whenever it floods. We have basis of connecting the green spaces that ultimately delivers better microclimate. Why? Because to deliver good microclimate, you do need the green spaces go right through the fabric of your city. Proximity becomes important. And once you do that, you create corridors of biodiversity. And therefore, you deliver the type of ecosystem services. And that's what makes it greener. So I want to leave you with 2 points. It's very simple to have the aspirations of a cooler, greener Adelaide. But to deliver that in a way that recognizes its ongoing essential services, we need to think about what are the elements that makes it cooler. The combination of water and the use of evapotranspiration processes, evaporative cooling processes, is what makes it cooler. What makes it greener? That is when those spaces deliver ecosystem services beyond cooling that can improve the quality of your environment, that can manage your stormwater as a resource, that can manage your floodwater, that can create biodiversity corridors. Those are the things in combination makes it greener. So that's my scene setting. Thank you very much for your attention.